Picture this. You're marrying into a dynasty, a name whispered in boardrooms and etched onto skyscrapers, only to be told, to your face, that you are fundamentally, irredeemably, not enough. How long would you smile before the frost in your veins turned to a burning, unquenchable fire? Before we dive in, pause for a moment and tell me something. Where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Don't just watch quietly, drop a comment below and let's see how far the story reaches across the world. Now, lean in and let's begin. The chandeliers in the Vance family's sprawling dining hall dripped with crystal and condescension, each facet glinting off the polished silverware and the even more polished, unyielding stares of my new in-laws. My name is Eleanor, and I was about to learn that marrying into old money didn't buy you respect, only a front row seat to your own public dissection. Tonight wasn't just dinner, it was an initiation by fire, and I was the kindling. Eleanor, darling, Victoria Vance, matriarch and empress of the Vance Group, purred, her voice a silken whip. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, swept over me, dismissing the years I'd spent in high-stakes finance, the countless deals I'd brokered. My husband, Arthur, shifted uncomfortably beside me, a handsome prop in a scene where I was clearly the interloper. The air thickened, laced with the scent of roasted lamb and unspoken judgment. I just tentatively suggested a pivot for their struggling real estate tech division, a division I'd spent weeks analyzing in my spare time, identifying its core vulnerabilities. I saw a future they were blind to, a digital tidal wave about to engulf their analog empire. But my words, carefully chosen and backed by undeniable data, were met with patronizing smiles from Arthur's older brother, Robert, and a theatrical sigh from his sister, Lydia. "The Vance way, Eleanor," Robert drawled, leaning back, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips, "has served us for a century. We don't chase fads. We are the standard." His tone implied my ideas were akin to chasing squirrels. Victoria chimed in, her voice now edged with steel. "You're simply not of the pedigree, dear. Your background, while perfectly respectable, doesn't quite grasp the nuances of legacy. Frankly, you're not aggressive enough for our world, yet too forward for our structure. You're simply not good enough for the Vance name, especially not to guide its business." The words struck with the force of a physical blow. Not good enough. In front of key investors, family friends, and my own husband. My hand instinctively clenched under the table. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It wasn't just the insult. It was the blatant disregard for competence, the arrogance that blinded them to their own impending doom. A small, dangerous part of me, buried deep under years of striving for acceptance, began to awaken. I met Victoria's gaze, my own eyes betraying none of the turmoil within. "Not good enough?" I silently vowed. "You have no idea what not good enough truly means, or what it can cost you." That night, sleep was a distant shore. Instead, I lay awake, a plan slowly, meticulously, beginning to form in the quiet hum of my mind. The Vances had lit a fuse. They just didn't realize it was attached to their own empire. And I was holding the match. Don't go anywhere. The fuse is already burning. The morning after my public shaming, I moved with a chilling, surgical detachment. The goal shifted from trying to earn respect to gathering the ammunition needed to force it. I had been dismissed as a decorative spouse. Now I'd be their phantom menace. My first move was to access the off-limits areas of the Vance compound, specifically Arthur's old study. Arthur, my husband, was kind but weak, more interested in pleasing his mother than facing reality. He'd never look in the back of his own filing cabinet, and that's precisely where the ghosts lived. The study smelled of aged paper and regret. Behind a row of dusty leather-bound volumes, I found the latch to a hidden compartment. Inside were not family jewels, but something far more valuable and infinitely more dangerous. Unauthorized, highly proprietary internal reports. These were the files the finance team hid from the public and, apparently, from the matriarch herself. I spent the entire day locked in, drinking lukewarm coffee and feeding the documents into my secure, encrypted drive. The numbers painted a horrifying picture. The Vance Group wasn't just struggling, it was in a death spiral. That critical real estate acquisition I'd warned them about in Act 1 wasn't just underperforming, it was fraudulent. The previous management had cooked the books, and the Vance team, blinded by arrogance and outdated due diligence, had missed every red flag. The consequence? A $300 million capital hole set to explode in less than 90 days. It wasn't a temporary setback, it was an existential threat. The Vances had bet the entire farm on this deal, and the failure meant they'd breached major covenants with their primary creditors. They were scrambling, not to fix it, but to desperately bury the truth. The arrogance of Victoria and Robert wasn't just rude, it was a deadly incompetence that threatened to undo a century of work. And in that moment, seeing the sheer scale of the deception and the danger, the need for vengeance became secondary to a more profound drive, the need for control. If I didn't intervene, the destruction would engulf Arthur too. I realized I held the entire empire's fate in my hands. The in-laws were too proud to seek external help and too incompetent to save themselves. The only person who understood the full scope of the disaster and possessed the analytical firepower to fix it was me, the woman they deemed not good enough. I closed the filing cabinet, the click echoing in the sudden silence. The game had changed from a marital spat to a corporate thriller. I possessed the bomb, and now I needed the right time and place to detonate the truth. But first, I needed to solidify my own position. I couldn't save them as Eleanor, the scorned wife. I had to become Eleanor, the competitor. The next day, I made a call that would fundamentally alter my future and seal theirs. They were about to learn what happens when you discard a weapon. The next morning, the grand, suffocating Vance compound felt strangely small, stripped of its illusion of invincibility. I packed a small bag, not a runaway's haul, but a soldier's kit, leaving behind the diamond earrings and the silk dresses that were merely tokens of my tolerated status. I left Arthur a simple, sterile note. I am taking back my career. I need space to breathe. The real reason, the explosive truth I held about his family's impending doom, remained locked inside my encryption. My first phone call, the one I had alluded to, was to Kingston and Cross, a notorious cutthroat investment bank that specialized in corporate turnarounds, which was often just a polite term for hostile takeovers and liquidation. They were the vultures of Wall Street, and I knew their hunger was perfectly aligned with my cold, calculated ambition. I didn't apply for a job. I presented a gift. I met with their managing director, a woman named Ilara, whose reputation for ruthlessness preceded her. I laid out the entirety of the Vance Group's insolvency risk, detailing the fraudulent acquisition, the breached covenants, and the specific timeline of their collapse. I showed her the data, not just the what, but the how and the when. Ilara didn't blink. She simply asked, "And why are you bringing this to us, Eleanor? You're married to a Vance." I looked her dead in the eye, my voice low and steady. The Vances dismissed my abilities. They are operating on hubris, not competence. They have a 90-day window before the bank sees their assets. I am offering you an unparalleled opportunity, a clean, profitable path to acquire the most valuable operational assets of the Vance Group when the inevitable default occurs. I want a seat at the table, Ilara. I want to be the one dictating the terms of the restructuring, reporting directly to you. It was an audacious proposal, a complete abandonment of family loyalty for professional power. But Ilara saw the genius and the chilling resolve in my plan. She knew I wasn't motivated by money alone, but by a deep-seated need for vindication. Within 48 hours, I was onboarded as a senior restructuring strategist at Kingston and Cross, a position that placed me directly across the firing line from the collapsing Vance empire. I was no longer Eleanor, the scorned bride. I was Eleanor, the operative. My new office, located miles away from the Vance compound, overlooked the city skyline, where the glittering Vance Tower stood like a monument to their impending obsolescence. The true tension wasn't in their looming collapse, it was in my new role. Every move I made for Kingston and Cross, every piece of advice that accelerated the inevitable default, was a step toward proving my in-laws right, that I was aggressive and that I was dangerous. But I was also saving myself. From my new perch at Kingston and Cross, I didn't just observe the Vance Group, I had a satellite view of their coordinated, frantic failure. My in-laws, desperate and deluded, were making all the wrong moves, exactly as my analysis predicted. Victoria, in a panic, was trying to sell off secondary assets to raise liquidity, but the market smelled the fear. Robert was making aggressive, hollow public statements about unprecedented growth opportunities, which only served to further spook investors who were reading between the lines of the collapsing stock price. They were operating in a bubble of antiquated connections and forced optimism. My job, however, was deliciously simple: exploit their predictable mistakes. I directed Kingston and Cross to strategically acquire the debt of the Vance Group's minor creditors at a discount. We were quietly gaining leverage, collecting pieces of the crumbling empire without them even knowing it. It was like playing a corporate chess game where I could see all their moves 3 steps ahead. One day, Arthur called. His voice was strained. The easygoing cadence was replaced by worry. "Eleanor, where are you? Mama's frantic. The banks are asking difficult questions about the acquisition." "They should be," I replied, my tone clinical. "I warned you all about the instability of that deal, Arthur. I showed you the data. No one listened." He pleaded, "But you know the numbers better than anyone. Can't you just give me a few pointers? Tell me what to say to the board?" This was it. The water starting to rise above their knees, and they instinctively reached for the life raft they'd once kicked away. The old Eleanor, the one who craved their family's approval, would have jumped to help. But the new Eleanor, the strategist, saw only an opportunity to increase the tension. I said, "Arthur," pausing just long enough for the sound of silence to amplify his panic, "I am a senior strategist at Kingston and Cross. My fiduciary duty is to my employer. If you want my advice, you need to retain me. And I'm afraid my rates and my terms have become quite steep." I could practically hear the color drain from his face. "You would charge your own family?" "No," I corrected him sharply. "I would charge the Vance Group, the corporate entity that publicly mocked my professional abilities, forcing me to seek employment elsewhere. You made it clear I wasn't good enough for your business. Now I am too expensive to save it." I hung up, feeling a profound mix of cold satisfaction and a tiny necessary pang of guilt for Arthur. But that guilt was quickly overcome by the exhilaration of control. The Vances had to learn that competence has a price, and they were about to pay it in full. The 90-day deadline I'd predicted arrived with a roar. The banks, having sniffed out the systemic risk, and more importantly, seeing Kingston and Cross circling like a shark, pulled their credit lines. The news broke like a shockwave. Vance Group, assets frozen. Default imminent. The market reaction was immediate and devastating. Their stock plummeted, wiping out decades of wealth in a single catastrophic day. My in-laws, particularly Victoria and Robert, were forced to appear on financial news channels to manage the crisis. It was a spectacular train wreck, and I watched it all from the comfort of my own secured office. Robert, red-faced and sweating under the studio lights, attempted a desperate narrative spin. "This is simply a liquidity challenge," he stammered. "We are confident we will resolve it. We have faced headwinds before, often from outside elements who don't understand our legacy." Then, Victoria, unable to resist, played the ultimate trump card of the arrogant and cornered. She tried to subtly blame me. "We've had some internal distractions," she said, her voice dripping with forced martyrdom. "Certain individuals prioritize their careers over family stability, failing to provide the support needed during a critical time of transition." It was a pathetic, transparent attempt to scapegoat the disloyal wife. But this time, I wasn't silent. Ilara, my boss, had anticipated this move. She organized a simultaneous press release announcing that Kingston and Cross was leading a coalition of creditors to determine the future of the Vance Group. The release specifically cited the gross financial mismanagement and astonishing incompetence surrounding the very acquisition I had warned them about. But the real gut punch was the quote attributed to me. The current crisis is a textbook example of how hubris and a refusal to modernize can sink even the largest of ships. The Vances ignored fundamental market shifts and sound financial advice from within their own ranks, demonstrating a dangerous inability to face reality. Our priority now is to protect shareholder value and secure the operational assets, not preserve outdated egos. The public commentary was immediate and brutal. The market, the media, and even their society friends read between the lines. Eleanor had not only gotten out before the sinking, she was now the captain of the salvage operation. The attempt to mock me as too aggressive had backfired, painting them as fools who threw away the only life raft they had. That night, my phone rang. It was Arthur. He wasn't pleading. He was just exhausted. Mom just threw a vase at the wall. The auditors are here. It's over, Eleanor. We need your help. We have nothing to offer. The atmosphere in the Vance mansion was no longer of haughty elegance, but of panic and decay. Servants moved silently, the air thick with the scent of old wood and fresh fear. The matriarch, Victoria Vance, had been unreachable for days, refusing to acknowledge the depth of the disaster. But desperation, like acid, eventually eats through even the thickest armor. My office at Kingston and Cross is where she finally had to come. Not a scheduled professional meeting, but an unannounced last-ditch attempt to appeal to my family loyalty. At 4 p.m., my assistant buzzed me. Miss Vance is here. Victoria Vance. She insists on seeing you. She looks awful. I instructed, let her wait. Not looking up from the financial projections that detailed the liquidation value of her prized assets, I let her sit in the sterile, modern lobby for exactly 45 minutes. 45 minutes for the woman who once made me wait at the dining table while she finished more important calls. When I finally allowed her in, the change was startling. Victoria was still impeccably dressed, but the iron had gone out of her posture. Her eyes, usually glittering with malice, were dull and ringed with exhaustion. She looked like a general who had just lost the final battle. She didn't attempt small talk. She walked right up to my desk, her expensive leather briefcase clutched tight. "Eleanor," she began, her voice a dry whisper, devoid of its usual power. "I need your help. The banks are moving to seize the operational assets. They're going to dismantle everything. I know you're leading the creditor talks. You're the only one who can structure a rescue." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, crossing my arms. "You've finally accepted that I understand the business, Victoria?" She flinched at the deliberate use of her first name. I admit we were perhaps too quick to judge your methodology. Your enthusiasm was misplaced, but your analysis, it appears to have been correct." "Appears to have been correct?" I repeated, my voice ice cold. "Victoria, your company is facing insolvency because you all were too arrogant to listen to the correct analysis. You didn't just dismiss my advice, you dismissed me. You publicly labeled me as not good enough to be associated with your name. Do you remember that night?" The shame was visibly painful. She swallowed hard. "I regret my words. They were spoken in anger and stress." "No," I corrected her, rising slowly to my feet. "They were spoken in arrogance. And now, you are stressed. And I am not angry. I am simply professional. Before we discuss a rescue plan, before I commit even a minute of my time, there is one condition. The apology must be complete, public, and on my terms. If you want to save the Vance legacy, you have to admit that the woman you scorned is your only salvation." The statement I slid across the desk to Victoria was meticulously drafted by my legal team, not just to secure my legal position, but to maximize her emotional capitulation. It wasn't vague, it was specific. It demanded a public acknowledgement that the current crisis was a direct result of ignoring Eleanor's specific early warnings. Victoria and Robert had gravely misjudged Eleanor's professional competence. Eleanor was to be granted full, undisputed operational control of the Vance Group, now Vance Holdings, for 5 years. A controlling 51% equity stake in the restructured entity would be assigned to a trust administered by Eleanor. Her eyes scanned the document, moving from the apology to the staggering terms of control. Her face, which had been pale with exhaustion, now flushed with outrage. "This is a takeover, Eleanor. You're demanding the keys to the entire kingdom." "No, Victoria," I corrected her, my voice unwavering. "A takeover is what Kingston and Cross would execute. They'd liquidate the assets, fire your staff, and scatter the pieces for profit. This is a rescue. I am the only one stopping the wolves at the door. I'm saving the legacy, but I'm doing it on my terms. I am securing the competence the company lacked." She argued, she pleaded, she even tried to appeal to my husband, citing Arthur's name as a reason for moderation. "Arthur is my son. You'll ruin his inheritance." Arthur's inheritance was already ruined by the incompetence of the people running it. I am salvaging what I can. Now stop wasting my time. The banks will have their decision by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Your signature is the difference between a controlled restructure and bankruptcy liquidation. Choose. The tension in the room was electric, a battle waged in silence over a single sheet of paper. After a grueling 10 minutes, during which she seemed to age a decade, Victoria let out a long, shuddering sigh. Her arrogance finally collapsed under the weight of utter defeat. She picked up the pen. The scratch of the pen against the glossy paper, signing her name below the words, "I, Victoria Vance, publicly and regrettably acknowledge my failure," was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. "Welcome aboard, Matriarch. Now, this is how we save a company." The following day, I put my own rescue plan into action. My legal team filed the necessary documents, staving off the immediate creditor actions. I had bought the Vance Group a single day of breathing room, and I intended to use every second of it. The centerpiece of my plan was a highly publicized press conference. The stated purpose was to announce the new restructuring efforts, but the true agenda was the public dismantling of the old regime's ego. I stood beside Victoria and Robert on the podium. I was cool, composed, and impeccably professional in a power suit. They were visibly brittle, dressed in the armor of their former status. I opened the conference, speaking with authority and outlining the quote-unquote bold, necessary steps we were taking to save the company, emphasizing the need for a complete technological and cultural overhaul. Then, I turned the stage over to Victoria. Her turn to speak was the climax of my revenge. She approached the microphone, the glare of the cameras forcing her to face the world she had always sought to impress. She began her prepared statement, her voice shaky but audible. She spoke about the acquisition failure, the liquidity crisis, and the need for new leadership. It was all a prelude. Then came the words, "I paid for." She paused, took a visible gulp of air, and looked directly into the camera lens. "I need to address a profound failing of judgment," Victoria began, her voice cracking slightly. "My son, Robert, and I operated with an outdated sense of confidence. We were, frankly, arrogant. We were warned, early and specifically, about the danger of this path. The person who provided the clearest, most accurate analysis was the one we foolishly refused to listen to. The person who is now our only hope for salvation. She turned to me, and the cameras swiveled with her. I am here today to publicly and unequivocally state that my daughter-in-law, Eleanor Vance, was right. We gravely and regretfully misjudged her professional competence. We dismissed her expertise, viewing it through the narrow lens of pedigree instead of merit. Her voice dropped to a near whisper, ensuring every microphone caught the raw emotion of the moment. Eleanor was right, and we were cruel fools. She is now the rightful leader of this company, and we owe her the survival of our legacy. The press erupted into a cacophony of camera shutters and shouted questions. Victoria had delivered the complete confession. The revenge wasn't loud or violent. It was precise, public, and utterly devastating to their pride. I stepped back to the mic, calm and victorious. Thank you, Victoria. We are all focused on the future now. I then pivoted seamlessly, delivering a masterful presentation on the financial stability plan. The family's shame was a historical footnote. My power was the current headline. The days following the press conference were a blur of restructuring meetings, bank negotiations, and staff reassignments. I was officially installed as the executive chairwoman and CEO of the new Vance Holdings. My in-laws, Victoria and Robert, were relegated to purely ceremonial, non-operational roles, high-paid ghosts in the halls of their own empire. The silent resentment, however, was palpable. Victoria would give me curt nods in the hallway. Robert avoided my eye altogether. But their deference was absolute. The pen stroke in Chapter 7 had permanently inverted the power dynamic. They were forced to attend my meetings, take my directions, and watch as I dismantled the old, inefficient layers of their regime. I hired my own highly competent team, sweeping out the sycophants who had contributed to the cover-up. The business was already showing signs of life under the new, ruthless efficiency. The real challenge was at home. Arthur returned to our apartment. He wasn't angry. He was humbled. He looked at me with a mixture of fear, respect, and a dawning admiration. I watched the press conference, Eleanor. She looked like she was breaking. Was that necessary? For the company, yes, I replied honestly. A public display of accountability was the only way to restore market confidence. And necessary for me? Absolutely. They had to understand the gravity of their dismissal. They had to know what happens when you prioritize pride over competence. He finally looked at me, really looked at me, and saw not the wife seeking approval, but the architect of a major corporate salvage operation. I was weak, Eleanor. I knew they were wrong, but I didn't have the strength to stand up to them. I chose the path of least resistance, and I nearly watched my whole family collapse because of it. I walked over to him, placing my hands on his shoulders. This company is your legacy, Arthur, but you need to decide what kind of legacy you want. The old one, built on arrogance and denial, is dead. The new one, built on merit and truth, is being constructed now. I can't do it alone. I need a partner, not a prop. He took my hands. You saved us all, Eleanor. You saved the company from my mother and my brother. I want to work with you. I want to learn. I want to earn my place in your empire. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was a real, earned one. Arthur chose competence over comfort, and he chose me. He was ready to be my ally. Finally. My revenge had not only secured my professional triumph, but it also forced a necessary, painful truth into my personal life. I had not ruined him. I had saved him from the toxicity of his own family. 5 years passed. The Vance Group, now firmly established as Vance Holdings, was unrecognizable. It was leaner, digitally advanced, and wildly profitable. The transformation wasn't just financial, it was cultural. Meritocracy replaced nepotism. I presided over a quarterly board meeting sitting at the head of the polished mahogany table, a seat Victoria Vance had occupied for 30 years. Victoria and Robert were present, of course, their positions secured by my restructuring, but their input was purely advisory. They spoke only when prompted, and their tone towards me was unfailingly, chillingly respectful. Their shame had matured into a permanent, necessary deference. They had stability and wealth, but their power was cosmetic, a quiet penance they had to pay every day. My relationship with Arthur had solidified into a partnership built on mutual respect. He was running a successful subsidiary under my guidance, having found his own competence outside the shadow of his mother's expectations. Our life wasn't passionately romantic in the dramatic movie sense, but it was strong, built on an unshakable foundation of shared reality and earned success. He was my partner, and I was his CEO. My revenge was not only secured my professional triumph, but also forced a necessary, painful truth into my personal life. I had not ruined him. I had saved him from the toxicity of his own family. One evening, Victoria found me alone in the old drawing room, gazing at a portrait of the original Vance Patriarch. She didn't offer an apology or a compliment, just a rare, unvarnished observation. "It's a better company now, Eleanor. More profitable. More honest," she admitted, her voice flat. "It is," I agreed, turning to face her. "Because I replaced arrogance with accountability, Victoria. That's the only formula that lasts." She simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her defeat and my victory. She no longer hated me. She feared and respected me in equal measure, and that was far more satisfying than hate. I had not just saved their business, I had saved them from their own destructive pride. I gave them back their future, but I permanently inverted their past. I walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the ghosts of the past. My journey was complete. I had been scorned, exiled, and returned as a conqueror. The fire I had held in my veins had secured my place forever. And that, my viewers, is the ultimate revenge, making your enemies not just regret you, but fundamentally need you every single day. They begged, I dictated the terms, and I won. What is the most satisfying act of revenge you have ever witnessed? Drop a comment below and let me know.